second day of exchanges for some of you. First day is still for a few others. So in any case, welcome to this first session. And this first session is about agreements for transboundary cooperation. And I'm glad to introduce you my colleague Charles Besançon, that he's an expert on transboundary cooperation, and he's working with us at the Ocean Governance Project, and he will be coordinating the session. So he will also give you some instructions for the best development on issues, on technical issues for the translations and so on. So I pass the floor to you, Charles. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Puri. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I want to welcome everyone wherever you are in the world. And this is session 3, Agreement for Transboundary Cooperation, part 1. There is a part 2, which you'll see that you've received. So we have 3 presentations today, which I'll introduce one at a time. I just show them here on the screen for you now, quickly. But first, I want to just cover a couple of quick housekeeping rules. So it's very helpful if everyone keeps their microphone on mute, unless you're speaking, unless you're taking the floor, which we will give you the opportunity to do. I'm going to start now by asking, or by noting that we have live interpretation in Bahasa Indonesian, French, Spanish, and English. And if you look on your Zoom bar, there's a button that you can press that says, I can't see it right now because I'm presenting. Does it say languages or interpretation, Barbara?
It says, well, I have it in Spanish. For me, it says interpretation.
Interpretation, okay. So go ahead and please click that now, unless you, we have Spanish and English presentations today. So if you understand Spanish and English, you won't need interpretation. Otherwise, select the language in which you speak, and things will be translated into that language. So good idea to do that now, unless you've already done it. And then we have Zoom chat, but we're asking you to please not write your questions in the chat, because there will be a question and answer session after each of the 3 presentations are done. We're going to have all of the presentations complete, and then we will open up the floor for questions. And the way we wish you to do that is to use the raising hands tool, and that's in the reactions. You click reactions and then raise hands. And that's if you want to take the floor, and we'll take you in the order in which the questions come in, or the comments. And as you've already heard, this event is being recorded. Right now we are being recorded. So thank you very much. And again, here's the 3 presentations that we're going to be hearing about. These are all related to this idea of transboundary cooperation. And I'll just give you a couple of quick slides as an introduction to this topic, just to set the stage for this session. So first of all, it's important to note that IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, defines transboundary conservation as a process of cooperation to achieve conservation goals across one or more international boundaries. And IUCN goes further to describe 4 different kinds of transboundary conservation. And I'm not going to read all of these, I'll just read the titles. The first one is a transboundary protected area. The second is transboundary conservation landscapes and seascapes. The next are transboundary migration conservation areas. And last are parks for peace. And you can read the detail on this, and I encourage you, if you haven't already, to read IUCN's guidelines on this topic. This is the kind of the state of the art on this topic globally. What these all have in common is that they involve some form of cooperation across boundaries in order to do the conservation. And why is this important? Oops. Sorry, yeah, why is this important to the Ocean Governance Project, this idea of transboundary conservation? Well, it's important because marine ecosystems and the marine species that live there, they don't recognize international borders. They go where they need to go. And effective transboundary management requires international cooperation. It's impossible to do this without countries cooperating with each other, with NGOs also cooperating with each other. Requires this strong international cooperation to be effective. And we have these targets. We have targets at various places in the world. We're about to establish a 30% protection target for the planet that will come through the CBD. That's the expectation in the next year to be agreed by all countries. We also have other regional and national targets. And so all of these targets, they absolutely must consider the transboundary approach in order to actually reach those targets. So that's my very quick introduction to the topic. So now we're going to hear from, we're going to hear 3 presentations in a row. And the first one is from Laura Camacho. And I'm going to stop sharing. And maybe you can focus on Laura. Laura is a marine biologist and professional on international affairs and cooperation projects at National Natural Parks of Colombia. So Laura, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, Charles.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thank
And,
you all.
Sorry, don't forget to hit the present button so we have this in full screen, Laura. Thank you.
Okay, perfecto.
En inglés.
Ahí ya pueden ver la presentación.
Yeah, now you can see the presentation, can you?
Perfecto.
Good.
Pues muchísimas gracias.
Okay, well, thank you very much to all, particularly the invitation made by the Ocean Governance Project and also the coordinators of this so important meeting, which is being considered a long time ago with the Coral Triangle, which is an initiative that we admire and with which we have worked ourselves also from this part of America. So today I am going to present a part of what we have worked together between two regional initiatives. The other thing I wanted to say is I want to thank the participation of all colleagues from the Coral Triangle, European, and all the marine protected areas that are here today in the framework of the Ocean Governance Project. The title of this presentation is Colombia, CIMAR, and the Coral Triangle, 6 years of technical cooperation experience. And we're going to see those 6 years, how they went through in this permanent cooperation between both initiatives. The first thing, and with the permission of our colleagues of the Coral Triangle to indicate what is the definition of each of these initiatives. The first one, of course, we're talking about a Coral Triangle, which I'm sure the colleagues of this triangle will present in their own session, much wider than what is the initiative, but maybe we're only to refer of the differences and the similarities between CIMAR and the triangle. The triangle, the Coral Triangle, is an initiative of 6 countries, which is made in 2009 to address these threats facing marine and coastal resources, having such a biological diverse and ecologically rich region for the whole planet. And its initiative is made up by the countries of Malaysia, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, the Solomon Islands, and Timor East. Also, we have the Tropical Eastern Pacific Marine Corridor, which is a regional cooperation initiative between 4 governments here in this part of America, which is Costa Rica, Panama, Ecuador, and Colombia. It was created in 2004 for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity in this area, which is the Eastern Tropical Pacific, through the establishments of joint governmental regional strategies, particularly, but also we have an important part by civil society and international cooperation organizations. I will refer mainly to the marine corridor of the tropical Eastern Pacific, because it's the initiative in which these 4 countries are working, and ourselves from the National Parks of Colombia, which is the institution for which I work. We are participating actively as a central technical point of this initiative. As I said, this is an initiative of the 4 countries, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, and Ecuador. As you can see there in the map, which you can find in Google Maps. If you get close to the Pacific Ocean, the 4 countries, you will find as a sort of a darker oval, which is what we are trying to represent here in this map at the right. And this oval is really as a darker region because, as we say, it's a naturally protected region. It's a naturally surrounded region because of seamounts, which are very high and going from point to point from Costa Rica to the Galapagos Islands, and from the Galapagos Islands down to the coast of Ecuador. So it's an area which is very important. It's a natural refuge, a natural biological refuge for different endemic species and migratory species. And this area is what we are describing as biologically as the Panama Basin, which is as it is known in all scientific articles on geology. Also, we have here a confluence of oceanic currents that come from the north and also from the south. So it's a region which, because it's in the equator, it's in this area of the equator, represents an important in biodiversity, a very important biodiversity area. It's the second most important area after the Caribbean in all that we know for Latin America and the Caribbean. The marine corridor has, of course, as protagonist, the protected marine areas, marine protected areas, which are 5, which are conservation nuclei of this marine corridor, Pacific Marine Corridor. We have the Coco Island National Park in Costa Rica, the Coiba Island National Park in Panama, Malpelo Sanctuary in Colombia, National Park Gocon in Colombia, and the Galapagos Marine Reserve in Ecuador. These are our 5 marine protected areas that you can identify in this map on the right, where here they are located, the 5 marine protected areas, which are the conservation focus of this marine corridor. I would like to go on talking about the corridor, but I'm sure that in the framework of the project in which we are all involved, we will have a chance to enlarge on this information. But what is calling us together here is to talk about this meeting between those initiatives which are so distant geographical, but are so similar in their structure, their origin, even though they never talk to each other, to build their scheme of cooperation. The Pacific Marine Corridor at the time, when it found its goals, its idea was to generate exchange also with all other networks in protected marine areas, which connect countries for conservation goals and sustainable use. And we managed to do this in the first meeting in 2016 with help of the Presidential Cooperation Agency in Colombia, which is called APC Colombia. It's an agency for international cooperation. And we managed to have a first regional workshop here in Colombia in 2016. We had a series of virtual meetings earlier, and this meeting, the idea was to meet each other. We had never actually been in presence of each other, both initiatives. And the idea was to know what were their expectations, their way of working, their operating, their regional plans, the origin, and others. In this first meeting, we found that both initiatives were created because of a declaration at a high level at the time for CEMAR. It happened in 2004, and for the Coral Triangle in 2009. We found that these initiatives were homologous because of their common goals in regard to conservation and sustainable use of a region, and that our idea was that the marine resources would stay a long time. An initiative that we believe is in the East Pacific, and Coral Triangle, which is in the West Pacific. Yet, we clearly have differences. CEMAR is made of 4 countries, and the nuclear areas are islands, which are marine protected areas, whereas the Coral Triangle Initiative is made up by the 6 countries, which are insular countries, the whole countries. So we are talking of the Coral Triangle is obviously huge, much larger. We are talking of a population, much larger population in the Coral Triangle than what we are talking about in the Marine Corridor. But we have a history and a background which is very similar. And we see why. The importance, we see that both regions, both CEMAR and the Coral Triangle, we have very high marine biodiversity. The area, obviously, the Coral Triangle is much, much larger in relation to CEMAR, but we have many more species, of course, in the triangle, but because of all the coral reefs that they protect, and we have less species, but there are much more endemics that we have to protect. The financial activities are similar. We go for fishing, tourism, and marine transport. So the similarities there, and also the structure. When we meet, we had never talked to each other, and when we met, we realized that the structure of both was very similar. For example, in CEMAR, we have a regional ministerial committee. They have a council of ministers. We have a temporary secretariat which coordinates regional. Coral Triangle has the same. We have regional groups where regional working works, and they also have working groups. We have national commissions, and they have also national coordinating committees. The working groups were also very similar. We share the marine protected areas and the sustainable fisheries, but Triangle does not have a tourism group, but they have a sustainable tourism group. So the link has been very, very close, very similar and complementary between both initiatives. After this meeting in 2016, we risked to formulate a common project, a joint project, which was a South-South cooperation between SMAR and STIF, and we are now seeing the results of both 2 initiatives. The idea was to generate common works, joint work, to strengthen both regional initiatives for the conservation and sustainable use marine biodiversity in the Pacific Ocean in general, The project was presented and approved by the Presidential Agency for International Cooperation of Colombia, and it's pointed at 3 areas: monitoring and effective management of FPAs, sustainable fishing with an ecosystem approach, and sustainable tourism. In the framework of this joint project, the idea was to develop these technical operational capacities to strengthen the management of Samar and the Coral Triangle. From the experience of both initiatives, we had a workshop in Bali, Indonesia in 2019, and also a workshop in 2019 in Gogona, and then came the pandemic, and with COVID-19 we had to go on with all the virtual exchanges, and there we are, and we are following. We're going on with this. We are developing virtual projects in 2020 and 2021. We kept going on, and here is how we're going. In regard to the main results of these projects, we managed to have a roadmap for regional analysis of effective management of MPAs, including all the strategies for monitoring invasive species. Our coordinator is an expert in invasive species, invasive species marine. Was a very important point. Also, we have a proposal for a battery of indicators for sustainable fisheries in the region, and the experience of the Coral Triangle was very useful because of the way they manage their. Oops, we are losing. Sorry. Coral Triangle works all the time in the sustainable fishing. Also, we have a proposal for improvement of tourism now that after the pandemic, after COVID, tourism post-COVID is key to our areas, to our marine areas, protected marine areas. And also, the project is finishing now, but we hope that we have a second phase, a new project we're working also with the agency and other partners wanted to join this proposal to strengthen this type of initiatives. So we are trying that it's not only a project of strengthening, but a cooperation program between SMAR and the Coral Triangle, and also inviting new partners to strengthen the relationship of 10 countries, 6 in the Triangle and 4 in the Samar. And we want to work together in other components of protected marine areas. For example, international recognitions, which we had in Samar, which are interesting also for the Coral Triangle, species monitoring, control of illegal fishing, which is a matter that we join, both of us, and also systematization of information in digital tools. This is basically what we are trying to aim now to continue in this relationship and this cooperation program. That's all. I invite you to visit our website, cmrpacific.org, and there you can find all the information of SMAR. I will be glad to answer any questions. I'll be here to reply, and thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Laura. Laura, if you can stop sharing your screen. And so I'd just like to say that that was very, very interesting way to start this session, because we're getting a look at 2 different transboundary initiatives that are in cooperation with each other across the Atlantic. So a fantastic initiative that Laura presented to us. And now I would like to introduce to you Emma Doyle. And for those of you who arrived late, we will be taking questions at the end after the 3 presentations are done. So save your questions, and we'll ask you to raise your hand later, and you can take the floor to ask your question. And also, Laura, if you can type into the chat the URL of the website that you mentioned, that would be great too for everyone's, so they can bookmark that. So now I'd like to introduce Emma Doyle. And Emma, maybe you can start to share your screen while I introduce you. Emma is a coastal zone management specialist who focuses on the wider Caribbean region. She has worked in international environmental cooperation in Latin America and the Caribbean for nearly 20 years. Emma is coordinator of MPA Connect, a learning network of some 30 Caribbean marine protected area managers in 11 countries and territories, in partnership with the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute and NOAA's Coral Reef Conservation Program. Emma provides leadership to MPA Connect's capacity building and networking activities for marine and natural resource managers, collaborating with government agencies, NGOs, stakeholder organizations, academic institutions, and the private sector. So Emma, if you can share your presentation, please.
Yes, here we go, sharing my presentation. Let me put this in presenter mode. How's that?
Fantastic, thank you.
All right, good morning. Thank you, Charles, for that introduction, and thank you very much to the organisers and to the sponsors for the invitation to present to you today. It's always great to connect with the Coral Triangle region where we have a lot in common. I'm going to take you to the Caribbean region now. The people on the screen here all come from different countries in the Caribbean. There are about 40 countries in total in the region. I have the privilege of working with about a dozen of those countries, and the slide that the presentation that Charles showed as introduction, speaking about some of the principles for transboundary conservation, are really coming to life in this series of photos that I've got here. We have colleagues in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in Grenada, in Mexico, working together, the Dominican Republic, Honduras, all coming together to share, to network, and to promote transboundary conservation. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we've brought this work to life and how we're working specifically on capacity building for marine protected area management in the Caribbean. The network that I coordinate, it's a partnership initiative between NOAA's Coral Reef Conservation Program, that's part of the US government, and the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute, which is a non-profit registered NGO, US-based but regional in the Caribbean. MPA Connect is an initiative of these groups. We're not legally established. We're an initiative under the umbrella of the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute, and we work with currently 11 countries and territories in the region. You can see them on the map here. We're a very diverse part of the world. It's not a huge area compared with the Pacific Ocean that Laura was presenting, but we have 11 countries and territories and 32 marine protected areas that we're working with. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about why we're only working, well, why we're focused on these places. Given the reality of limited resources in conservation, we wanted to make sure that our funding was put to most effect. Now, we are working on international cooperation. This is, as a transboundary initiative, this is really an exercise in diplomacy at the start. We selected, a group of experts came together and we selected a number of countries that we felt met with selection criteria to invite to be part of this transboundary network. The most important thing was ecological significance of the coral reefs in our network. And we set out some very specific criteria as to what ecological significance means for our part of the world. We looked for countries that were committed to different international initiatives related to conservation in the marine environment. We also looked at the readiness of the countries to participate with us, in that they had to be implementing marine protected areas as a tool in fisheries management, in sustainable development. And at the time, linkages to our funder was important. So we invited a number of countries to participate. They then were invited to nominate a series of marine protected areas to participate with us in this network. And we then had very specific criteria to help guide them. The biological value had to be high in the marine protected areas. The conservation viability had to be good, and the level of threat moderate to low. With the limited funding, we wanted to try and bring about a tangible impact. So we needed to be working with places where the level of threat was really going to be too high for our cooperation to make a difference in. So those were the principles that guided how we started our international cooperation. Now, that's not to say that we're not inclusive of others. And a big part of my job is actually to try and reach out to other partners in our region to help other marine protected areas and other countries to participate in our capacity building activities, because obviously we have a lot in common. You can see there's a number of white dots on this map, and these are the other countries that have taken part in our capacity building. In total, we've had an additional 28 marine protected areas and an additional 60 MPAs taking part, and a total of 28 countries and territories in our region taking part in our network, including our friends in Colombia over in San Andres here. So we actually like to think that we have some MPA Connect spillover. This is a very important principle, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with, this concept of spillover. So from our network, we've tried to be as inclusive as possible of all those who seek to benefit from us, whilst working with our core network who benefit from our major funding that we're able to give to them, and additional co-funding can help us open the doors to others to take part in our cooperation activities. Now, how do we go about doing this? Well, we have quite a clear process. The first step in this is that we undertook an MPA management capacity needs assessment. I'll tell you more about that, but it's the starting point of working out the needs for capacity building in our network members. We were able to analyse the priorities across all our participating countries and look for where are their common priorities. We've then focused on enabling peer-to-peer exchange between the countries and between the protected area managers. We've also provided site-level support for small projects, for smaller exchanges, direct mentorship within the network. In the process of doing this, we have established a regional network, which has become quite cohesive and has endured now over 10 years. Our process, though, is really founded on cooperation, on reciprocity, and on trust. And our members are very generous in their sharing. Our relationships are ones of trust and mutual confidence. When we talk about MPA management capacity, for us, there are 20 different elements that we look at and that we've worked on, that we've identified as fundamental for directing our capacity building efforts. You can see them listed here. And I think anybody who works in MPA management will know that you need to be an accountant. You're sometimes a policeman, you're a scientist, you're a fisheries officer. You need to have a good strategic mind. You're also a teacher sometimes. You need to be a diplomat and an ambassador. And I think that is this is what we try to capture in all the capacity needs for an MPA manager for effective MPA implementation. So we asked our managers, how are you doing in relation to those 20 different aspects of management? Do you have little or no capacity, medium capacity, or high capacity? And that looks different depending on what area we're looking at, obviously, on which element we're looking at. But it enabled us, when we went into a lot of depth as well into why, and we have a user guide, and our tool, our capacity assessment tool, can be found online. in English, Spanish, and French on our website. But it enabled us to look at each site in turn in a common way and look for where are their capacity strengths, weaknesses, and priority needs. We presented the findings as a top line in story map format, and that enables us also to look at what's happening around the region and see that, for example, in our network, we have about 50% of the sites that have some sources of funding to support their activities. Only 15% really have a sustainable financing plan, and we have about a third who have really very few reliable sources of funding. That was in 2011. By 2017, we've been able to track how the situation looks. We repeated that capacity assessment, and we now know that we have more sites that have some sources of funding. So for each of the different management capacity elements, we have this sort of information to guide us in knowing what's happening in the different countries and to look for mentors and to look for the priority needs. Now, when we looked across all those 20 aspects of management, the top priority needs identified by our managers were these ones: sustainable financing, law enforcement, biophysical monitoring, fisheries management, and outreach and education and management planning are always high up. So this has been guiding the main cooperation work that we do. We hold peer-to-peer learning exchanges, which are really regional workshops. In the past, they've been face-to-face, hosted in a different location each time, but very much focused, for example, for a week focused on sustainable financing, and then with follow-up activities, small projects, and support to enable our members, our participating MPAs, to go home to their countries and try out something that they've learned. Our peer-to-peer exchanges have been kind of annual events. You can see here, this is our timeline for our transboundary conservation work, our timeline of capacity building activities, and ongoing site-specific follow-up throughout. We don't do this alone. I act as the network coordinator. I have some program assistants. I have a coordination team. We have a group of MPA manager advisors who help us in planning. We also have a core group of mentors on different topics. And we also have technical experts, of course, who help. And our technical experts, and we have funding partners who are, many of whom are represented on here. We try to measure our impact by looking at changes in skill level capacity. We, of course, monitor the rating of our activities together. We look for connectivity across the network, you know, how much interaction is going on between the countries that take part in our network and between the managers on the ground. Are they keeping in touch? Are we helping keep them in touch? And we look at the depth of interactions. We have some very close mentoring that's going on, for example, in relation to financing, where one of our mentors has travelled with me to 5 different MPAs to really help them to develop their MPA budgets and to apply a budgeting approach that's been successful in one country to the other countries as an important foundation to our financing work. So really, I can speak in terms of numbers of interactions between our members on different topics, but when it comes down to it, really it's about the connections between people and bringing to life transboundary cooperation in the Caribbean has been very, very real in terms of these person-to-person connections that are enduring. The network needs to endure even as staff positions change. But for us, you know, bringing these capacity activities to life and ensuring depth of connections, ensuring and facilitating communication and mentorship has been fundamental to our work going forward. I'm very happy to take questions on any topics of interest when we come to that, and I'm always happy for you to reach out to us. I'm here. Emma is the coordinator. Dana in the US NOAA program, she's a fundamental person and a program assistant in Jamaica. And please give us a follow on Instagram. We are active on Instagram and Facebook, and you can find us on the web as well. I'm happy to put that in the link, MPA Connect Caribbean.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emma. And can I also ask you to do the same and post the URL for the initiative in the chat so that everyone can bookmark that and look back on it after we're done? Well, that was fantastic, in-depth. It sounds like a fantastic program where you're taking a real kind of data-driven approach to thinking about the capacity needs there through surveys. And not surprisingly, sustainable finance is the number one need. And I think we find that across the Atlantic and across the world. So now I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Andrés C. Melesi. And Andrés, if you want to start to share your presentation. Andrés Melesi is a marine biologist, he's an oceanographer, and he's the coordinator of the UN Un Solo Mar project in Uruguay. So over to you and your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, gracias. Buenas
Thank
tardes.
you. Good afternoon.
Buenas noches.
Good night. Good evening.
Bueno, agradecerles
I want to
obviamente
thank, obviously,
the invitation para hacer esta presentación y
to make
cuando
this presentation.
uno ve toda
One sees
la experiencia
all the experience
de los
of
otros
all others
presentadores
presenters,
y lo
all
que
other
estamos haciendo nosotros
speakers,
obviamente
what
nos
we are doing
aúna a generar más esfuerzos
helps us
y
generate more
tener más
efforts
proyectos en
and get
este
more
sentido.
projects going.
Nuestro proyecto obviamente
Our
que
projects obviously
involucra lo que
involves
es Brasil y Uruguay,
Brazil and Uruguay,
dado un contexto que
in a
tenemos,
context
obviamente que es
which we have
conocidos por todos,
known
es
by all.
una de las principales actividades que tenemos
Main
en
activities
el
we
mundo
have
y en nuestra
in the
región
world
también,
and in our region
es la
also
pesca,
is
la
fishing,
cual en los últimos
in
años
which
ha
in the last
tenido
years has had
un estancamiento en sus
a
capturas,
stagnation of its
probablemente
captures,
debido a la sobreexplotación de
mainly
todos los
due to
recursos
overfishing of all the
pesqueros a nivel mundial.
overexploitation of all the fishing
Y en
resources in the
nuestra
world.
región,
In our
la
region,
situación no
the
es
situation
diferente.
is not different.
Nos encontramos entre
We
dos
find
grandes países,
that
Brasil y
we are between
Argentina, el
two
pequeño
large
país
countries,
de Uruguay,
Uruguay is between Argentina and
donde
Brazil,
las capturas
where
están disminuyendo en
captures
los
are going
últimos
down
años
in the last
y
years,
tenemos una situación
and we have
crítica
a
en lo que se
critical
refiere a
situation
pesquerías.
in the fisheries.
Las pesquerías
Fishing
han generado
has
muchos
caused
cambios
many
en
changes
nuestros ecosistemas,
in our
con un
ecosystems,
cambio en la dominancia de
with
las especies,
change in species
en
dominance.
las tallas, cada vez
Also in the
pescamos
size spectrum,
peces más chiquitos.
the fish
Ha
are
cambiado
smaller.
también el perfil de la
The
captura.
profile, the catch profile
El
has
nivel
changed.
trófico de la
The
captura
trophic
también
mean level of the
se ha
catch
visto
also
modificado.
has been
Tenemos
modified.
Ecosistemas cada vez
We have
más
ecosystems which
simples
are
y también hay una
simpler,
gran
and also there's
variabilidad en las
large
poblaciones. Por
population
tanto,
variability.
las
So,
pesquerías han generado
fisheries have
cambios
generated
muy fuertes
very
en
strong
nuestros
changes
ecosistemas.
in our ecosystems.
Obviamente que hay
Obviously,
otras
there are
problemáticas,
other
como por
problems,
ejemplo la pesca ilegal,
for example, illegal
que
fishing.
no solo
Not
tenemos
only
la
we
problemática
have the problem
en nuestras aguas y
in
en
our
las aguas
waters
del vecino país de
and in
Brasil,
neighboring
sino
country of
que
Brazil,
también
but
recibimos
also we receive
en el puerto de Montevideo
in the harbor of
barcos que a
Montevideo
veces son
ships that
sospechados
sometimes
de
are
haber
suspect
realizado pesca
of having
ilegal en
fished
otros
illegally
lugares, en
in other
otras áreas de pesca.
fishing areas.
También otro de las
Also,
problemáticas
another
que
one of the
tenemos en
problems we
nuestra
have
zona es la
in
sísmica.
ours is
Y Uruguay
seismic
ha
prospects. Seismic
proporcionado a nivel
Uruguay
internacional
has
áreas para
provided
exploración y
areas for
perforación
exploration and
marina,
drilling
offshore,
of marine offshore
las cuales
drilling,
se muestran
where
en
you can see
esta
it
imagen.
in this image.
Lamentablemente se
Unfortunately,
han realizado algunos
there have been
exploraciones sísmicas sin
some
haber
seismic
tenido siquiera un
prospecting
protocolo
without having a
previo para
protocol,
la exploración.
previous protocol for
En
exploration.
la actualidad hay un
At present,
protocolo
there
que
is a
está
protocol,
trabajando en la
and
mejora del
we are
mismo
working
y
in
trataremos
improving
de
it,
que
and
Uruguay
we try that
no
Uruguay
vuelva
will
a
not
la
again
exploración
go
sísmica,
back
ya
to
que es un
seismic
país
prospecting because it's
que
a country
tiene
that
casi
has
el 100% de
almost
su matriz
100%
energética
of its
dependiendo de
energy
energías
sources
renovables, como por
from
ejemplo la
renewable energies
hidráulica,
such as
la
hydraulic,
solar, y también la
solar,
eólica.
and also aeolic energy, wind
Entonces,
energy.
¿qué es lo
So,
que vamos a conservar?
what is it
¿Qué es
that
lo
we
que
are going to
tenemos para
conserve? What
conservar en
do we
nuestras
have
costas?
to
Bueno,
conserve in our
tenemos
coast?
más de
Well,
700
we have over
especies de
700 fish
peces, tanto
species,
óseos como
both bony and
cartilaginosos,
cartilaginous.
decenas de
We
especies
have
de
tens of
mamíferos
species
marinos,
of marine
como
mammals,
ballenas,
such as
delfines
whales, dolphins,
y lobos marinos, y
sea
elefantes
lions,
marinos,
sea elephants,
aves marinas,
seabirds,
más de 1000 especies
over
de
1,000
invertebrados,
species of invertebrates,
como por ejemplo las
such as
vieiras,
scallops,
cangrejos y
crabs,
los corales,
and of course
corales de
corals,
profundidad que
deep corals
recientemente han sido
that have
descubiertos.
been recently discovered,
Obviamente tortugas
obviously sea
marinas
turtles,
y bueno, ¿qué es
and
lo
what
que
is it
hemos estado
that we
protegiendo?
have protected?
¿Qué es lo que
What
necesitamos?
do we need?
Necesitamos
What we need?
nuevas áreas marinas
New
y más
uh,
áreas marinas en nuestra región.
marine protected areas, more
Entonces ahí
new
nace el
protected areas in our
proyecto
region.
Un Solo Mar,
And this is
que
our
es
project,
eso, la
One Single Sea,
conjunción
Un Solo
de
Mar.
ecosistemas del sur de
It's
Brasil
the
con
ecosystem
ecosistemas
of
que
southern
tienen
Brazil
similar
and
composición y
similar
tienen
composition of
similares
ecosystems
especies,
and similar
que son
species,
ecosistemas
which
del
are
Uruguay,
ecosystems of Uruguay.
que cubren
They cover
una gran
a
zona y
large
que
area,
junto con
and
otras
together with
organizaciones
other
no
organizations,
gubernamentales,
other
en este caso
NGOs,
IBJ e Instituto de Baleia
like
Duarte,
IBJ, the Baleia
de
Duarte
Brasil,
Institute in Brazil,
conjuntamente con nosotros,
together
con
with
OCC
ourselves,
en Uruguay,
OCC in
estamos
Uruguay,
proponiendo la
we are
generación
proposing
de
the
nuevas
generation
áreas
of
marinas.
new
El principal
MPAs.
objetivo es
The main
ese, obviamente,
objective
generar
is to
no solo las áreas,
generate
sino que
not only
también
the areas,
realizar
but
un
also
manejo efectivo
do an
y
effective
obviamente
management of
también
MPAs,
un objetivo general
and
que es
a general
tratar
objective
de disminuir o
is try
desalentar
to
la pesca ilegal tanto en Uruguay como en
address
Brasil.
illegal and
Obviamente los
unregulated
objetivos
fishing both in Uruguay and in
específicos
Brazil.
van a
The
depender
specific objective, of course, will
de las
depend
políticas del
mainly on the
Estado y
policies
trataremos de que
of the
las
states,
políticas de Estado,
and we'll
tanto
try
del sur de
the
Brasil como de
policies
Uruguay,
of Brazil and
vayan
Uruguay
hacia esta
go
generación de
together
áreas marinas
in
protegidas,
the
la
idea of
consolidación
generating
de
new
las mismas
MPAs,
y un efectivo
consolidating
manejo
and effective
para
management
que éstas
of
sean
these so that
sumamente
they are
eficientes.
efficient.
Esto es lo que tenemos
This
protegido
is what we
hoy
have
en nuestras
protected
aguas
today in
en
our
Uruguay.
areas.
Menos del
Less than
1%. Son
1%
aguas muy
are
costeras,
very coastal
muy
areas,
cercanas a
very
lagunas
close to
costeras
coastal
y
lagoons,
obviamente
and
estamos
obviously
ya
we are
retrasados en los
very
objetivos
delayed in
que
our
se han
objectives,
propuesto a nivel
which have been
internacional del
protected
2020
internationally for
y
2020,
queremos
and we are trying
recuperar
to
ese tiempo
recover
perdido
this lost time,
proponiendo al
proposing
menos 2 áreas
at least
marinas
2
protegidas
new
con una extensión
MPAs
de
with an
alrededor de
extension
los 50.000
of
kilómetros cuadrados. Una de
50,000
ellas
square
es más
meters.
costera,
One
en
is more
donde
coastal,
se encuentra una de
where
las
we
colonias
find
más grandes
one
de
of the
lobos
main
marinos
colonies
a nivel
of sea
mundial,
wolves,
que en este caso se llaman
and
lobos,
it's
y
called
pueden
lobos, wolves
observarla en este
in Spanish.
sector.
You can see it in this
La
sector.
otra área
The other
es
one
offshore, es más
is offshore,
hacia profundidades,
more
donde se
towards the
encuentra
deep
una comunidad
waters,
de
where there's
corales de aguas frías
a
únicas
community of
a nivel
cold
mundial,
water deep coral reef,
conjuntamente con
which is
un
unique
área
in world,
propuesta
and also a
para el sur de
proposed
Brasil
area
que
for
se
southern
llama
Brazil, which is
Albardão.
called Albardão.
Estas áreas, si
These
bien
areas,
aquí parecen que
although
no
they
estarían
don't
conectadas,
seem to
tienen
be
su
connected here,
conectividad,
they have their own
trataremos de que
connectivity.
así
We will
sea,
try to do it,
y tienen una comunidad
and
de organismos que están
have a
conectados
community of
y están
organisms that are connected,
interconectados con
interconnected
ciclos de
with
reproducción o
reproduction
ciclos de
cycles
alimentación.
or
En
feeding
este caso
cycles.
les quería mostrar
I wanted to show you
algo que
something,
apoya todo esto que hemos estado viendo
something
de que
you
los
can see
animales no tienen
that
fronteras.
animals have
Y
no,
este es un
no
pequeño
boundaries. And
cuento
here's a small tale
de un petrel, de un ave
about
marina,
a
el
petrel,
cual
a marine
nidifica en una pequeña
which
isla,
nests in a small
las
area,
islas que están en el
islands
Atlántico,
that are in the Atlantic,
las islas Tristan da Cunha,
the Tristan
y
da Cunha
que
Islands,
proviene a esta
but,
zona a alimentarse en
it
cierta época del
comes
año. Esto quiere
to feed in
decir,
these areas in certain
obviamente,
time of
que
year.
tenemos que
So
proteger
we have to protect
esta zona de
this species,
alimentación para tan
this feeding
nobles
area for
aves,
for these noble
obviamente
birds,
acordándonos
seabirds,
de ese trabajo
remember
magnífico, creo
that
yo, de
magnificent
Philippe
work
Curie,
of
en
Philippe
donde
Curie, in which
se menciona que la
was
naturaleza
mentioned
es
that
obstinada
nature
y
is
que
obstinate,
obviamente
and
estas
obviously
especies como
these
otras, por ejemplo
species
los salmones
like
o las
salmon
tortugas,
or turtles
pasan muchísimas
spend
trabas para llegar a sus lugares para
lots of difficulties to reach their areas to cover their cycles.
Hemos tenido el
We have
apoyo,
had
gran apoyo
the
de
great
National
help of
Geographic
National
en
Geographic
una campaña
in a
realizada
campaign
recientemente para potenciar
recently made
estas
to
áreas marinas
empower these marine
de
areas
Uruguay.
in Uruguay.
Esperamos contar
We
con
hope
otra
to have
en
another
el
one
próximo mes de
in the
diciembre
next month
a
of
estas
December
zonas que
in these areas
anteriormente les
that
mencioné
we have
para
mentioned
tratar de
to try
descubrir
to discover
obviamente las
obviously
especies que tenemos
the
ahí
species that we
y
have there
generar
and
una
generate
visibilidad a
visibility
nivel regional e
at the regional
internacional
and
para
international
la
level
promoción de estas
for
áreas
the
marinas
protection and
protegidas.
promotion of these protected marine areas.
También tenemos una expedición
We
en
also have an
Brasil, en la
expedition
zona
in
del
Brazil in the
Bardão.
Albarão area.
La misma será en
We'll
febrero del 2022.
we'll do
Esperemos que
in
la pandemia
2022.
obviamente nos
Let's hope the
permita
pandemic will allow us
juntarnos con los
to
colegas brasileros
meet
y
our
hacer esa
Brazilian
campaña en
colleagues
ese tan
and do
bonito lugar.
this
Si
campaign in
ustedes
this wonderful
quieren,
place.
después
If
obviamente
you want,
podrán ver
later you
algunos
can
videos que
see
se han
some videos
generado en
which
esa zona
have been generated in that
y
area.
pueden ser observados
You
en
can
YouTube.
see them in YouTube.
Nuestro programa, nuestro proyecto
Our project
involucra también lo que
includes
es la
also
educación en escuelas
in
primarias de
private
Uruguay.
primary schools in
Más de
Uruguay.
300 niños han
More than
sido,
300 children
digamos, capacitados o
have been
instruidos en lo que
taught
es la
about
conservación
the
y
importance of
particularmente
protecting,
la generación
conserving,
de áreas marinas protegidas.
and the
Y
generation of marine
obviamente
protected
también
areas,
charlas
and
a
also
nivel
talks, educational
de
talks
diferentes
at different
grados,
levels
escuelas
at schools,
secundarias y
secondary
universidades
schools and
también,
universities
como
also,
también
as well as
obviamente
obviously
trabajando con artículos
working with
científicos
papers and
tanto
scientific
regionales
papers
como
in
internacionales.
international and regional journals.
Han pasado casi el 50% de
50% of the
nuestro
project
proyecto.
has been already completed.
Hemos generado
We have
muchísima
generated a
gestión
lot of
con
management
los tomadores de
with
decisión,
the stakeholders,
particularmente el
particularly
Ministerio de Ambiente
the
de
Environment
Uruguay,
Ministry in Uruguay,
universidades, diputados,
universities, deputies,
senadores, la
senators,
industria pesquera,
fishing
también
industry,
ONGs
and
nacionales e
NGOs, national and
internacionales,
international NGOs,
embajadas, entre
embassies,
otros.
among
Y
others.
tenemos
And we
la
have
próxima semana
next
un
week,
taller,
a
un
workshop
meeting donde creemos
where we expect,
y así se nos ha prometido
and we have
el
promised
ministro
that the
de
environmental
Ambiente del
minister
Uruguay
of Uruguay
generará una
will make a
declaración para
declaration
la creación de áreas
for creating
marinas
new
protegidas
marine
en
protected
Uruguay.
areas in Uruguay.
Nos faltan
We have
dos
two
campañas más,
more or the campaigns,
una con National
one
Geographic,
with
como
National
les
Geographic,
comentaba,
as I
y
mentioned,
otra
and the other one
con otras
with other
instituciones que
institutions,
prontamente se
which
realizarán en
soon will
nuestra
be
zona.
made in our area.
Eso es lo que
That's
tenía
what I
para
wanted
comentarles.
to show you.
Muchas gracias
Thank
por
you
la
very much
invitación
for the
nuevamente.
invitation again.
Pueden seguirnos
You
en
can
nuestras
follow us
redes,
in
Un
our
Solomar,
networks, Un
y
Solomar,
también
and also
en OCC o en las
in
instituciones a las
OCC
cuales
or the
estamos
institutions
trabajando.
which we
Si
are
ustedes
working.
tienen preguntas,
If you want any
atentamente
questions, I will
las
be
evacuaré.
glad to
Gracias.
reply. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andres. And I want to thank all three of the speakers. And maybe you can stop sharing your screen, Andres, please.
Yes.
Thank you. And I just want to thank all of the speakers for their excellent presentations. And really, you make this easy for me as the moderator by thankfully staying within the time limits that we have. So thank you so much for that as well, which means we have lots of time for discussion. We have time for questions, and maybe you have some comments you want to make as well. And also one note to the people providing the translation, the audio in the last presentation, I could hear the speaker as well as the same equal volume, and I think I should only be able to hear the translation, the interpretation. So that's just a note to think about. Thank you. And so it's time now to take any questions and comments that you might have from the floor, from any of the participants out there. We ask that you, if you wish to take the floor, you have a question, to raise your hand, and you do that by clicking the reactions button and then to raise your hand. Even if you've already posted something in the chat, we ask you to please raise your hand digitally through Zoom, and then we'll call on you one at a time. And while you're thinking about what you want to ask, I'm going to ask the first question from all three speakers. And this is, of course, noting that all of the initiatives that you've just presented to us are quite different, and they represent initiatives that have been going on for quite some time and some that are quite new. But my question to each of you is, was there anything surprisingly easy and what was surprisingly challenging about the work that you've presented to us? So not just what has been easy or difficult, but what has been surprisingly easy. So you went into this with some expectations. What was really surprising to you? And so I'll ask Laura first to reply to that, or maybe you want to pass and maybe Emma or Andres can answer instead.
Gracias, Charles.
Gracias. Thank you, Charles. What we found surprisingly easy was suddenly the work that we managed once we met. The more difficult part was to meet each other, the CEMAG and the triangle. That first moment, that first interaction, I think was the most difficult part. But after that, after we met and we started a dialogue, both initiatives, we understood in what was each one, what were the challenges. I think the work has been surprisingly easy and continuous also, because one thing is to have initial work. We could have remained on the 2016 meeting, but surprisingly, it went on. And now we have been for 6 years working without having hoped for so much. So I think that beyond this first meeting, I think is also the interest of both parts. Even after the different timetables, the different languages, the different customs. In Asia, it's in the morning, and here we are at night. In the works, it's not so easy, but that's one of the challenges. But I believe that what is surprising was the time of that we have been working together.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Again, if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand digitally using the reactions button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and then clicking the raise hand. And I'm going to ask that same question that I asked, what was surprisingly easy and surprisingly challenging. I'll ask Emma next the same question.
Okay, sure, Charles. Let me speak in terms of different areas of management capacity that our different countries and managers have in common. When I think about what's perhaps been easiest, in 2012 we held a regional workshop on law enforcement for marine protected areas, and it was the first time that marine protected area managers and rangers had come together in the Caribbean to share specifically about enforcement. So that was a great opportunity to connect. As an outcome of that, everybody was interested in knowing, how does their legislation, how does their legal framework, how do their penalties, their powers compare with best practices among their among their colleagues in other countries? So we undertook with the Environmental Law Institute an in-depth study of the legal framework for MPA enforcement, comparing best practices and the status around our network members. That was a very good basis to then do country-specific enforcement training, and we were able to help each of our member countries to hold joint law enforcement training for the park rangers together with the local law enforcement agencies, were the police, marine police, coast guard, defence forces. Once we got police trainers, military trainers, park rangers together under the same roof, that we were able to dispel a lot of the confusion that exists and to run some really practical law enforcement training that all of those officers got excited about. And as an outcome of that, we really built the in-country collaboration between MPAs and the law enforcement agencies, which led to some operations and some very productive busts. So that's been very satisfying to work on the law enforcement angle, and I think has happened naturally with capacity being built. Now, enforcement capacity depends on financing to implement, so we're still trying to work more on strategic enforcement capacity and spatial monitoring and reporting tools. And it does require fuel, so the financing side of things is critical, and ensuring we have good staff and trained staff that we can keep with enough financing. So then the hardest thing, the most difficult, I think, is the work on sustainable financing. The financing puzzle is not solved, it's far from being solved. We've learned that it's not just about building capacity. It's not just about sharing an experience or an idea that works in one country and hoping that another country can pick up that financing mechanism and apply it and generate funds. It's more about site-specific, really helping look at the unique context for each MPA and looking at what are the possible financing mechanisms, how do we develop implementation plans. Communications is critical, some expertise is critical, some mentorship, and we learned that our MPA managers really don't have the numbers at their fingertips when we ask them, what is the gap in your budget? Where are you needing the funding? What's the program area that's needing funding? We often had project budgets, but we didn't really have organizational budgets and forecasts. And so building, working on that with mentors who are trusted, who the managers are happy to share about the real financial status of their organization that requires a lot of trust building, and it requires a lot of in-depth work. So we've approached that in small subsets of countries and managers, and it's ongoing. So that's difficult.
Okay, thanks, Emma. I see there's some specific interest in this topic of conservation finance, MPA finance. So I'm going to paste into the chat just another resource for people to look at, which is the Conservation Finance Alliance. I also happen to be the chair of the working group on protected area finance for this global organization. Emma in the chat noted Wolf's Company. We're working closely with Wolf's Company through this international initiative, Conservation Finance Alliance. And we're just about to launch the new IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas Sustainable Finance Specialist Group. So I'll be the co-chair of that along with another person in South Africa. So look to see a lot more action on that topic from the work that I'm involved with and so many others around the world. So I've pasted that in there. Thank you, Emma. Now the same question to Andres. Andres, the question again for everyone is what is surprisingly easy and surprisingly challenging about the work that you've been involved with?
Gracias.
Thank you. We have been working for 1 year in this situation, and we have found, in fact, and very personally, in my opinion, one very good receptivity on the part of the politicians, the decision makers, surprisingly, and also with the actors, for example, the fishing companies. And it was a good experience. I did not have any problem in that first talk, a first contact with the fishing businessmen that one would think would be more damaged. They are not, because of the situation they are having of low captures. So they are allied also with us in illegal fishing and also seismic. So the main enemies we have found, in fact, became our best allies. That surprised me a lot. And also the Uruguayan state, the Brazilian state too, are worried about financing of these marine areas. But who's going to take charge? What cost, what resources, both human and financial? That is the main worry that we have in this region. The a posteriori, an area can be generated, but the level of politics in Uruguay for the time being, and let's hope it doesn't change, is very have a long-term thinking. I will establish the marine protected areas, but I need resources for them. So they have a long-term thinking. They are afraid that they may not accomplish the goals. And that's, I believe, a great factor that we have to improve and to try to tell the decision makers, our politicians, that we can manage to obtain the resources abroad for these areas, these marine protected areas, not only be created, but also be efficiently managed. I hope I have replied to your question with that.
Yes, thank you very much, Andres.
Okay, a ustedes.
Okay, I'm looking now at who has their hands up, and the first person to put their hand up was Puri Canals from the EU Ocean Governance Project. So Puri, you have the floor.
Yeah, you can give the floor to Dr. Nora first. If there is additional time with no more questions, I will ask mine. But please give the floor to Dr. Nora. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Nora, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Puri, and also thank you very much to all the panelist presenters. Excellent and very exciting presentation. I would like to inquire about the transboundary connectivity that was alluded to by both Andres and Laura and also by Emma. Have there been sources and sinks identification and any influence on the climate change discussions? And how do we move forward further with this transboundary connectivity? Because this is relevant to us, because in the Coral Triangle areas, our connectivity sources and sinks may come from adjacencies, for example, South China Sea, etc. Thank you very much.
Okay, which of our speakers would like to take that question first?
I can do an answer now, if you want.
Go ahead, Laura.
Gracias, Nora, por tu pregunta.
Thank you, Nora, for your question. In regard to the matter of connectivity, we have worked in these exchanges of experiences that we have had, because we talk of initiatives that get together among countries. As I said, Charles said, the species know no boundaries that we mark as countries. So both initiatives, both the sea and the Coral Triangle have this perspective of joints between countries, recognizing there is connectivity between species, and it's necessary to control, to have monitoring and have comparable data among us, both protected areas, but also among countries. Also, on the other side, in regard to climate change, I believe you have been a reference for us from CEMAR. When CEMAR was created, we did not have a vision of how to take care of climate change. Climate change has been sounding more like political commitments with stronger technical commitments. But when CEMAR was created, we had no vision in that way. I believe you too have helped us to have more and more this global aspect, which undoubtedly must be taken into account. And the help you have given us, the support you have given us has been wonderful. Even yesterday, the presidents of the 4 countries did a common declaration in CEMAR to make nuclear ocean protected areas, and also to join efforts for all the matter of climate change, which today is, with these commitments, with international commitments, it's becoming more and more important. So on that side, I believe it is working a lot through international cooperation with international allies. The CAP, which is offers some resources, but it depends a lot also on the political commitments and the announcements that are made in these kind of agreements that happen in the framework of COP and the climate change project in which we are now.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Emma, do you want to take the question next?
Yes, certainly, Charles. That's a good question. With connectivity in our region, that's something that's very important when we work on fisheries management, and we look at sharing best science, best practices, best legislation related to management of shared fisheries resources. It's also important in terms of biophysical monitoring. You know, I'm thinking about on the ground, what are our managers doing in terms of climate change response, monitoring of connectivity, monitoring of impacts. You know, we work on biophysical monitoring, which can include coral health monitoring, bleaching monitoring, monitoring also of emerging threats such as disease and pelagic sargassum influx in the region. Some of that monitoring and sharing on connectivity also relates to building work that we do to build capacity to strengthen resilience of coral reefs in the face of climate change. Communications is a cross-cutting issue, whatever we're working on, whether it's any of those things like fisheries management or biophysical monitoring or socioeconomic monitoring, communications is essential, and targeting our communications about these issues towards different target audiences is another really important area of capacity building, and something that maybe our managers don't do as much as they might, thinking about upwards level communication on climate policy. Probably more what I'm seeing is that we've been able to get support for climate change adaptation work to help our managers work with their related communities and fisher stakeholders, farmers also, to look at how can we help those communities adapt to climate change in such a way that we're also building the resilience of our marine protected areas, of our marine environment, to ensure sustainable livelihoods. So there are many different aspects of management that I think we touch on when we talk about climate change and connectivity. But I would flag communications as perhaps being something where driving policy is a need. Yeah. Not sure if that helps.
Thanks, Emma. Andres, the same question over to you.
Sí, gracias. Excelente.
Yes, thank you. Well, an excellent question. And we're going to the same line. Uruguay shares the same resources as Brazil and Argentina. So the next step will be also to involve our neighbors in Argentina that will also share this species and this connectivity. But also, it's important the fact of having these species, making them known that we're sharing. We're doing an effort to educate children and politicians and newsmen, reporters, that we share, and we have all these species that we cause damage to them here. It will, the species have no boundaries, so they will be damaged elsewhere too. Particularly, climate change, global climate change is affecting us, obviously, and the Atlantic Southwest Atlantic is a hotspot in that sense. We have observed anomalies in surface sea temperature much higher than the world average, and this has generated a change in some species which were fishing resources, now they are not. So it has in a social part and a financial repercussion which should be taken into account regionally by the politicians. So it's very important to run this consultation, and for countries like ours, which are small, with not much resources, to have international backing in this key, in this situation in which we are now.
Okay, thank you, Andres. Puri, your hand is still up, so would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I have a question for each speaker. First of all, thanks to the three of you, because I really enjoyed listening at you, and even if there are certainly different points of view for transboundary cooperation, so then it shows that the real effectiveness happens when we are able to combine many different levels. So I think your examples are certainly very, very useful. So a number of questions arise to me when I was just listening at you, and some are very technical, but I think they might be interesting. For instance, for Laura, you talk about that at a certain moment, one of the thematic issues you have been working is in the management effectiveness, but at a regional scale. So I will be very interested in knowing a little bit more how did you address this, if you did only in CIMAR, if this was something also that you share with the Coral Triangle, and what were the results of that? Because normally when we talk about management effectiveness, we are used to see protocols and methodologies for a specific MPA. And so I think this is really, really interesting as an element for regional cooperation. So then for Emma, I'm so impressed every time I hear all what you are doing, and my question is more about the structure of the MPA Connect, because did you ever think in transforming this, let's say, project? I think it's much more than a project, but let's say the current structure you have towards a permanent, let's say, institution or a permanent program that can have even deeper, not an impact, but more capacity to address even other aspects that are relevant for managers. So just because you make me to think about the history of my own network in the Mediterranean, MEDPAN, that we began by being financed as a project, but at the end the managers were so happy with this kind of capacity building support that they want something more permanent. So just if you had this kind of thoughts. So and my last question for Andres is, okay, you show us different, in a map, different potential MPAs coming from the results of scientific research in the area, and they are not transboundary in terms of touching each other, but as you say, this is absolutely connected by the ecosystems connect everything, so it's out of question, the biological connectivity. But my question is more in terms of the government involvement on that. If in addition of all this science-based information that is proposing certain areas, is there a kind of connection between the governments of Uruguay and Brazil to discuss what will be the best models of governance, the best models of for the designation of those MPAs? So I'm thinking more not as a transboundary protected area, but an harmonization of models that can really guarantee that the key resources that the scientists have identified are managed in an equivalent manner in the two countries, and they establish mechanism for monitoring and for management, and especially for enforcement that could be really equivalent. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Puri, for the great questions. Well, let's just start with Laura, if you want to respond to that question.
Gracias, Puri, por la pregunta.
Thank you, Puri, for your question. Yes, we had an exchange of experiences, which was in Park Gogona here in Colombia, as I mentioned, in 2019, where we just focused on the strategies of management on protected species. That is a project that has several matters, because this initiative is not, we're not only talking about MPAs, but of sustainable use, because we are talking about a territory that not only has MPAs, but also there are uses in the local communities which depend on them. But in this meeting in 2019, we focused on marine protected areas, and we managed to make a comparison between those management effectiveness analysis in each country, and we found very many similitudes, because generally the methodology of management effectiveness have very similar parameters. In fact, they have indicators for financial indicators, but also control and surveillance, indications of community work, monitoring, and all these indicators are common. We have them. What changes a little is the way in which the analysis, the way we place the indicators, and also the way in which we systematize them. For us, it was very important to know the experience of the Coral Triangle, because they have have a premium protected areas, which are a higher level of effectivity in an atlas of protected areas that they have, that they show us, where they have classified the areas because of their level of protection and management effectiveness. I believe the level is from 1 to 5. 5 is the highest level of effective management. And so it was very interesting to share that on how it's managed in the triangle and how we manage it in our areas. There are also differences, and also there are differences between the countries, but the follow-up is similar, that we have patterns that are similar.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Well, the next question then is for Emma. And yeah, Emma, I was wondering about this as well. What is the permanence of MPA Connect? Is it just an initiative? Does it have a short, is the money going to run out in some years? Or have people considered the need for this to be a much more permanent structure? It sounds like with the work you're doing, I don't know how the Caribbean could survive, the marine protected areas could survive without this initiative. So tell us, please.
So we are an initiative. We don't have a legal identity, but GCFI, the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute, is our sort of mother organization, and GCFI has been around for 74 years. We're not going anywhere. We have a board comprised of members from all around the region. We have an annual meeting. There's a portfolio of sort of project support, and our mission is communications on marine management issues. So GCFI is not going anywhere. And MPA Connect, I think although we started as a 2-year program, we've been able to have continuation funding since now more than 10 years ago from NOAA's Coral Reef Conservation Program. Our important donors, and they're more than donors, they're a critical part of our cooperation team. We've developed the the capacity assessment tool that we use to get, based on NOAA work and domestic scenes. So we've grown through the activities we've done. We've really established a meaningful network. Now we see ourselves as a permanent program, and I think we are now more than a project. And there is a lot of science about networking and about regenerative networking, and the fact that a network continues to exist even though the members might change, faces might come and go, but we still have the countries involved, we still have the managers involved, and people come and go, but they still participate, they build new links. And so, we're hoping that our network certainly is permanent in that sense. We are in a bit of a growth phase at the moment where we've been able to attract some additional funding, and we're able to expand our network a little more. We also, in terms of our structure that Puri was asking about, we do want what we do to be relevant for managers. We are ground up, and part of how we achieve that, aside from the guided self-assessment of MPA management capacity that we do roughly every 5 years, we also have our mentors, which I spoke about, and we're trying to make that into a sort of a sustainable financing mechanism for those MPAs, because providing consulting advice, providing input to their counterparts in the region, to their peers, if they're going to do that meaningfully, that is a demanding process. And so making sure that we reimburse them for that and their time without taking them away from their own work is a challenge. We do have a leadership team of managers, or an advisory group of managers who help us shaping our strategic directions and who've helped us to implement the capacity assessment with their peers. We're looking for how do we involve them more going forward, but again, recognizing that they have very important day jobs to do, and that we need to be mindful of that. So I think we are in a phase now of looking at how do we mature as a network, and what best is the structure. And yeah, we do need a coordinator. We need a team who guides and helps with funding. We're also thinking about what can we do as a network as part of the sustainable financing solution. We don't want to manage a trust fund necessarily, but we can help things happen at network level for financing that perhaps the MPAs alone can't do, maybe with some innovative mechanisms. So we're looking at that. We require technical support, we require technical expertise. So we do have a structure, and yeah, I should probably connect again with Puri. It's always good to chat and learn from the established MPA networks in the world, such as PIMPAC, MedPan, and others.
Okay, great. Thank you, Emma. Well, I'm conscious of the time, and I do want to respect everyone's time here. So I see Veda has his hand up. Veda, maybe you want to just make some quick remarks instead of asking questions, because I'm not sure we have time to really do that well.
Thanks, Charles. Yeah, one concern about the transboundary cooperation in Southeast Asia. Mostly we have an issue with the transboundary traditional fishers that traditionally they fishing across border. So that's what I want to ask, maybe from you all three have an experience addressing this traditional cross-border fishing that built before the establishment of a border between the country. If you have any experience that maybe we learn on that. Thank you. Okay,
again, looking at the time, our time is up in 1 minute, so I'm not sure we have time to address that. But let me just ask Barbara to let me know, do we have a hard stop at 6:30, or can we take time to answer this question?
Yes, I think the question is interesting enough. I hope our interpreters, they don't want to stay for another couple of minutes, please.
Okay, fantastic. Good. Let's do that then. So let's start with Laura. And if you can be very brief, please.
Claro que sí. Gracias por la pregunta. Bueno,
Thank you for the question. That's some interesting matter because I believe fishing depends a lot of the sovereignty of each country, and we have not managed to work together in rules or having a common fisheries between the countries. No, we haven't. Beginning with fishing is different in the different countries. Which is artisanal fishing in Colombia is industrial in Ecuador. So the characterization of fisheries is different between us. But we do is to work among the fishing authorities. We have a group of sustainable fisheries, and there the authorities meet to share some initiatives that we have in agreements with the Navy, for example, with the Navy authorities for the matter of illegal fishing to be able to fight it. But common fisheries, we get an agreement. I'm afraid it's very difficult because of the difference that we find in the countries. But there is some common work as far and respecting sovereignty, yes.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Emma, have you had this issue come up?
Sure. I just briefly put in the chat message that there are two cases that come to mind from the Caribbean. Belize and Guatemala have issues with, particularly Belize's barrier reef has a lot of issues with illegal Guatemalan transboundary fishes, and that requires enforcement. The MPA rangers managers are involved in the Marine Security Council at an enforcement level and very in touch with what's going on. The interesting thing is the MPA managers are about to co-manage and take over co-management of a new MPA that's right on the boundary. And so at that technical MPA level, the managers are very much coming together to manage a new area and to tackle that issue. We also have the Grenadines network of marine protected areas where it's a very small area. There's a lot of movement between the islands, and there is a sub-regional MPA network there, which is very active in terms of sharing resources for monitoring and working together on enforcement. So a small technical sub-regional network is a good help there.
Okay, thank you, Emma. And Andrés, same question to you.
Sí, gracias.
Yes, thank you. Maybe I would mix up the question with the recent question of different fisheries. We have a shared system with Argentina, but not with Brazil, which are our partners, which also have fisheries that we share. And we have illegal fishing from Brazil to Uruguay, and we have a lot to do. So we have to generate policies for the management of fisheries, particularly with Brazil, try to standardize some things. As Laura said, we also have differences in the Brazilian industrial fishing or semi-industrial fishing, which is with Uruguay. There are some differences, but we are fishing the same resources. So we have all to do. It's a great challenge, and working with the scientists of Brazil, which we are doing, working with the politicians in Brazil, with the politicians in Uruguay, we can generate at least a baseline for the better use of our resources. It's all to be done. The project is new, the idea is new. It's an area where we recognize that the records are the same. The data has never been shared on the situation as we are doing now. So the backing of their experience is going to generate, I expect, a good framework for this situation to be marine and transborder management of marine resources, to have a better end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Andres. Well, it's my pleasure now to say a few words in closing, and then I'll pass it to Puri to do the real closing. But I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank the speakers, first of all, for their very engaging presentations. I learned a lot, and I'm left with optimism after hearing these great initiatives and all the fantastic work that's happening. So I feel quite optimistic at the end of this session. Tired, but optimistic. And so I just want to thank all the speakers. I also want to thank all the participants for your attention, your contributions. And I look forward to seeing you throughout the rest of these virtual learning exchanges as part of the Ocean Governance Project. And it's been a pleasure for me. So I will now turn it over to, before I do that, I also want to thank Puri and Barbara and all of the team working behind the scenes to make this happen, who, because we're working in 3 different time zones around the world, they're getting very, very little sleep. So congratulations to all of them for pulling this together. I think it's working very well. And now I give Puri the floor for some closing comments.
Thank you, Charles. And I will be very quick on that. So thanks to all the speakers. I think that has been great to listen to you. There's a lot of ideas also for the ocean governance, but thank you especially to the participants, because without you, there's no sense to organize the learning exchange. So I really hope that this is useful to all of you, and I hope that you will continue joining us until the end of this week. And thank you again to the translators, because without your support, this exchange will not be so easy and so, let's say, agreeable for every participant. Thank you, everyone, and see you in a few hours. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Take care.
Hasta luego.
Thank you, Charles, especially to you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Coordinating the
Thank
session.
you. Goodbye. See you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Charles. Bye-bye, Puri. Bye-bye, Barbara.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Adiós.
Thanks all.